So again, I'm just going to give a very brief introduction with our speakers that we have here today in the back. And it's red or pink, I can't tell from here.
Red.
I have really bad color vision.
Okay.
Zdenka Willis will be talking about a little bit about ocean observing and in general, global and ocean observing, how we come up with data, why it's important that we collaborate and work with others in terms of these networks of data and what it contributes in terms of our understanding of the Earth. We'll next turn it over to Lori Miller, who will talk about global, regional, and local sea level rise and implications for coastal communities. Many of you have heard a lot about sea level rise or vulnerability of various coastal communities. And then we'll dig down a little bit where William or Billy Sweet will talk a little bit about, okay, we can measure sea level rise from satellites and things, but how do we then bring that down to, in terms of how do we tell if sea level's rising, say, in Ocean City or Norfolk or Miami or anywhere else for that matter? And what are the basic trends and patterns that we see across the U.S. and what does this mean for vulnerability and within coastal communities? And then we'll get a little presentation of science on the sphere and then open it back up for any questions that you have. And you can ask questions after each speaker, and then if you have further questions at the very end, you can ask more then. Just again, very generally, NOAA is an amazing agency. How many of you have heard of the National Weather Service or gotten a weather forecast? So that's kind of your entry into NOAA, but it is far broader and more diverse than that. So basically, we like to say from the surface of the sun to the depths of the ocean floor, our real mission is to understand, protect, and share that information, whether it be changes in climate, weather, oceans, and coasts, sharing that information, developing products, and making them useful towards decision makers. And then we also have a stewardship mission too. So things like managing fisheries, marine protected areas, endangered species, and habitats that support protected resources and fisheries. And again, just a very quick snapshot. So NOAA is pretty much defined by these, what we call line offices. And so again, we do weather, so National Weather Service, hurricanes, forecasting weather, that sort of thing. OAR, what we call NOAA research. So everything from climate modeling to looking at, say, tornadoes, tornado research, severe storms, hurricanes, that sort of thing, to NESDIS, which we call NOAA satellites, and you'll see many of the data products from that. But we do oversee a constellation of polar and geosynchronous satellites. Polar satellites, which you'll see kind of go around the Earth. A geosynchronous satellite, what you see on the nightly news or a satellite image, basically stays in one place, and as the Earth turns, it's kind of your eyes on one place. Our National Ocean Service, that is a kind of a diverse mixture of everything from nautical charting, so when you see nautical maps or where the shoreline is, we have scientists who do that. Things like sea level rise, marine protected areas, national estuarine research reserves, and a variety of other things related to oceans and coasts. A lot more focus on resiliency these days and making our coastal communities more resilient. And also services, you'll see some real-time data of how we help the transportation industry in terms of getting ships in and out of our coastal ports and harbors. And finally, our fishery service, where we are responsible for stewardship of and managing many of our federal fisheries and working with our states on coastal fisheries plans, as well as species like monk seals, whales, dolphins, seals, and a variety of other things. Coastal habitats, and we do restore damaged habitats, whether it be from oil spill or ship groundings and things like that. So if you do need to reach me, I do have cards. If you have any questions or need an entry into one of these diverse areas of NOAA, feel free to contact me either by email or phone, and I'd be happy to help steer you in the right direction. Jeannie, I think we need to. I don't think I can do that here. So again, our first speaker is Zdenka Willis, and she is the director of our U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System, which is she'll go into a little more details, but is it a cooperative how we coordinate all these millions of data points of observing our coast and ocean.
Great, thanks Brady, and it's really great to be with you all this afternoon. I live in the National Ocean Service, but IUCE is a national program. And it really, what I hope to do today is talk to you about the importance of ocean observing and how really you all can be our conduit to be able to talk about the importance of this real public service and this public good. So what is NOAA? As Brady said, we are the nation's environmental intelligence agency. We keep the finger on the pulse of the planet, and we're trying to put environmental information into the hands of people who need it. We work with many partners, whether it's our other federal agencies, private, public, nonprofit sector, and we touch the lives of every American. So coastal communities are becoming more vulnerable to severe events. The question in our time is not if the event's going to happen, but when, and what kind of blow is that event going to provide to our economies and our communities. And so what we're really trying to do, and what I'm going to talk to you about today, is through the use of observations and data and models and products and services, how we can help our communities really become more resilient. So to set the stage, I want to talk first about the tools that we use. So first we have our satellite, the constellation satellite. And the important message that I want to illustrate here is that the United States can't observe and take the pulse of the planet alone. Observing really is a team sport. And so what you see is our geostationary and polar orbiting, and then you see our partner geostationary and polar orbiters coming up on the animation. And satellites are really amazing. I mean, they give us information such as winds, altimetry, ocean color, salinity, to name a few. But it really is a partnership. We, along with NASA and the United States, rely on partnerships with Europe, with Japan, with Brazil, with Argentina, and Taiwan to maintain this constellation. But for the ocean, the satellites are not enough. We've got to be able to observe on multiple scales. We've got to be able to go from microbes to whales, from instances to centuries, and from the surface to the bottom of the ocean. And on the left-hand side, I call this our traditional observing. It's our buoys, it's our gauges, it's our ships, it's our aircraft. But notice we also need divers, so we have to be in the water. We also have a lot of labor-intensive sampling we need to take in laboratory. And the images on the right, I call these our new kids on the block. These are our technologies where we're expanding our observing. The environmental sampling processor, which allows us to do in situ assay of toxic algae. We're actually put sensors on lobster traps. We have a number of unmanned vehicles that either stay at the surface, the wave glider looks like a surfboard, or our profiling glider, which actually goes up and down in the water, profiling down to thousands of meters. We've got the Argo float I'll talk about in a minute. We're starting to put a lot of new sensors and different types of sensors on existing moorings. We have high frequency radar, and we're even tagging our friends. We tag sharks, we tag seals, we tag turtles, and we tag birds. And all of that, and fish, to be able to help us understand where we're going. And we have to use all of these sensors in a complementary fashion, because it's our job to observe more than 71% of this planet, which is made up of the oceans and the Great Lakes. So looking at ocean and climate. So through their fluid motions, the high heat capacity, and their ecosystems, the oceans play a central role in shaping the Earth's climate and its variability. Changes in sea level rise are a major impact on our coastal cities. Therefore, it's vital that we monitor and understand the changes in the oceans and their effect on climate. And I'm focused here on Argo. And this is a global array of 3,000 free drifting profiling floats that measure temperature and salinity in the upper 2,000 meters of the ocean. And we do this in partnership with 26 nations to allow us to keep those 3,000 floats in the water. We just took our 1 millionth profile last year. We're extending the depth of the Argo float, and we're improving the Argo float by adding chemical and biological sensors. Now, the two talks that you're going to get this afternoon are really going to focus your attention on ocean observing and climate. So I will leave them to give you the details. So how does ocean observing save lives? Through the Integrated Ocean Observing System, we have, in the United States, the largest network of high-frequency radars. And high-frequency radars measure surface currents. And surface currents are a foundational measurement for the ocean, much akin to the winds in the atmosphere. And this example here is we've integrated this information into the Coast Guard's operational search and rescue system. And if you look at the plot of without HF radar and with HF radar, we can decrease the search area by 2/3 in 96 hours, and that means saving lives. So we do this, and other uses of HF radar include the integration of this information with NOAA and state agencies for oil spill response. It was used for the Costco Busan when it ran into the bridge off of California. It was used in Deepwater Horizon. It's integrated into our National Weather Service's systems at the Coastal Weather Forecast offices to help with wave forecasting and rip current forecasting. We've used this for criminal forensics. We can use reverse engineering and figure out that body that just washed up on the beach, where it came from. We've actually used this to understand larval dispersion, which is important from an ecosystem perspective. So let me turn to industry. On the West Coast, the shellfish industry is $111 million and provides thousands of jobs in Oregon and Washington. But the livelihood out there was actually threatened by a changing ocean chemistry. So I want to tell you a story about Whiskey Creek Hatchery in Netarts Bay, Oregon. It's owned by Mark Weigert and Sue Cudd. And as Mark would say, you know, what happens in the ocean affects my business. That hatchery uses between 75 and 100,000 gallons of seawater every single day. And this picture, yes, that's me. That might look like a little bit of dirt, okay, this in here, is really 100 million oyster larvae. And in 2008, they put the larvae into these large tanks, and they had 0 survival rate. And they thought they were going to lose the business. So they turned to the oceanographers. We have the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program. We have our IUS region in the Northwest, to try to find out what was going on. They initially thought it was a bacteria, and it turned out it was ocean acidification was the culprit in this particular case. So we've extended the offshore buoys into this system here. Doesn't look high-tech, but it really is, to understand what the water chemistry is. And now we're able to treat the water, and I'm happy to tell you that the business has rebounded. We've put this system in a hatchery in Oregon, in the state of Washington, and we've also extended to 2 other locations in California and Alaska, and we're going to continue to fund this effort to work with the shellfish growers. Yes, sir.
So can I just, excuse me, can I just ask, so if NOAA is going and advising businesses, do they have to pay for your expertise? How does that work? Do they call you?
So this is a joint partnership in this particular case. So it takes on different flavors. In this particular case, it is the shellfish growers are working directly with NOAA, and a lot of we get in-kind support for maintaining the buoys and ship time. So they're not actually paying for us in the forecast. And part of it is because we're still doing the research and trying to understand what this phenomena is. So in this particular case, they are not actually paying for the public good service. So this is Hurricane Sandy. So what the animation is showing you, and what I want to point out here, is the importance of the satellite imagery and the modeling that NOAA does. We were able to forecast 5 days ahead of time where this storm was going to land. And this animation is actually based, the track is where we forecasted 5 days ahead of time. So as you saw, the track actually verified very, very well. And it's really important to have not only the accuracy of the track, but we also need to use the accuracy, the intensity. So we're starting to use more and more ocean observing to be able to do that. And this is what the HF radar saw as Hurricane Sandy was moving up the coast. So we're using radars, we're using drifters, we're using gliders, because it's important not just to understand what's happening on the land, the rain events, the wind events, but we need to understand the storm surge and where that's coming from. And basically, how much water is there going to be and where is that water going to go? So we need to bring all of that observing together to be able to provide for safe evacuation and very much the pre-planning of relief assets in high ground so they're able to get into the hard-hit areas after a storm. But once the storm goes by, NOAA's not done. And in particular in the National Ocean Service, we have the Office of Coast Survey, and we also have the NOAA Corps within NOAA, who uses boats and ships to do surveys immediately after the storm, because the Coast Guard cannot open the port until they know it's safe from debris that might have moved on the bottom of the ocean. So very quickly, we deployed our navigation response teams, the NOAA ships, and able to open up the ports rapidly. It's very important to understand the shoreline. Here's a before and after. FEMA needs that, local officials need that, the public needs that to be able to understand what the damage is and how to get relief in. Through our Office of Response, OR&R, Office of Response and Restoration, we also provide scientific forecasting for the Coast Guard in response to oil spills. As you can imagine, the storm goes through, infrastructure gets destroyed, and we have oil spills we need to respond to and marine debris. And we're going to take a look at this video. We're not sure exactly how fast it's actually going to run, but this, I wanted to show you the impact. You can see the impact on the land, but this is actually the impact of Sandy on the bottom of the ocean. So what you're seeing is railroad cars, so think large railroad cars. They're off the coast of Delaware, and they were put down there for a reef. And what we're simulating here, because we were able to survey before and after Sandy, is as that water comes through and the force of the water coming through here, you'll actually see this railroad car split in two. So let me give that a minute. It's only a minute long, so we'll give that a minute to run through there. And you're starting to see as the water comes through, it's actually breaking up and moving the railroad car. And what I wanted to just talk to you about is really the force of which, this ocean is disturbed when we have a major hurricane. So you can think about that of what's going on our ocean bottoms and through the entire, ocean column. The last thing Sandy has really helped with is a focus on resiliency. And it's really changed that dialogue. It's become a national dialogue. And we're looking at new building structures and how do we talk about making the communities resilient. And can we use green infrastructure as compared to gray infrastructure to make those communities more resilient to storms? And so this is actually a simulation of what the coastline in the gray infrastructure or the jetties, the rocks would look like with a green infrastructure. And what we need and what we will need is new monitoring techniques to understand how effective this will be. But this is all the discussion in trying to make our communities more resilient. Okay. All right. So ocean observing actually is important to our trade and plays a big role. 98% of everything we consume, we wear, we drive, or we construct is brought in via ships through the North American port system. In 2011, we had $570 billion worth of exports. So shipping is important. We've got to move it in safely, and we've got to move it in efficiently. We expect maritime traffic to increase significantly, and with the opening of the Panama Canal, the dredging of the Panama Canal, we call post-Panamax ships are getting larger and larger and coming into our ports with less and less clearance under the keel. So to get those ships in, we can't do it without ocean observing. We had the physical real-time oceanographic system, which started in 1991 based on an accident in Florida where a ship did actually hit a bridge and killed people. And now we have it in 24 areas, and it's a combination of observing systems that not only NOAA puts out, but in the case of the wave buoys, the Army Corps puts out, or IUS puts out. And we are able to use that along with models to be able to get our ships in safely. Our Off Coast Survey is responsible for our nautical charting. We are the nation's charting agency, and they have charts that cover 95,000 miles of our coast. We also need to be able to work with the pilots outside of the harbors. The pilots need to understand through the coastal buoys and the wave buoys and the forecast when the conditions are safe for them to actually board the ships, so they themselves are safe, as well as safely bringing the ships in. Also, the more advanced warning we can give, we can actually do diverts that actually save the ships from an economic perspective as well. So fisheries management. This is another interesting story. So butterfish is a type of fish, and it was actually an issue for the squid fishermen in the mid-Atlantic. It was considered a bycatch. And in fact, our National Marine Fisheries Service shut down the squid fishery in 2012 because they were approaching the caps for the butterfish. So the fishermen were concerned, and they said, hey, can we use this ocean observing stuff and know where the butterfish are so we can avoid it? So we got the oceanographers from the National Marine Fisheries Service, and we got the oceanographers from the IUS Mid-Atlantic, and they had something they called a butterfish smackdown. They said, let's see who can forecast where the fish are, the fishermen or the oceanographers. So on the first time, who do you think won, oceanographers or fishermen? Fishermen. You got it. But the fishermen were intrigued enough to work with the oceanographers, and a trust relationship developed. And so they brought in fisheries managers, the commercial fisheries, the oceanographers, social scientists, and they actually did come up with a new butterfish model. And this model, so they developed a new model that determined the population of the butterfish. And what they determined is there's really more butterfish out there than we thought. So although the goal was avoiding butterfish as a bycatch, in this past June, the National Marine Fisheries Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council actually deemed that butterfish could be commercially viable. And they increased the allocations by 500%, which has the potential to turn into millions of dollars of revenue for commercial fishermen. And that's using both the oceanographic modeling and the observations. So let's turn to tourism. So coastal HAB events, harmful algal bloom events, are estimated to cost about $100 million per year in impacts. I don't know about you, I vacation every year south of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and I spend hours in the ocean with my nieces body surfing. I'd kind of like to know if I'm in safe water. One of the problems that we have is that we have to go out and take water samples. And then we take the water samples back to the lab and we do an analysis on it. And a lot of times we're closing beaches on 24-hour-old analysis. So what we're trying to do through the use of satellite information, the use of modeling or use of observations, and the new technologies like the environmental sampling processor is to bring those ecological forecasting into real time where they're more accurate and they're more precise. So let me turn to coral reefs. So every year, millions of scuba divers and snorkelers visit coral reefs and enjoy the abundant sea life. Even more tourists visit these regions that allows for an economic boom to beaches where there are coral reefs. You have scuba diving trips, you have boat trips, and so this is what we want to be able to see is our healthy coral reefs. And I was at the Capitol Hill Oceans Week last year, and I think that there's a gal by the name of Sonia Mendelson, who's the head of sustainability of JetBlue. She said it best. They've actually figured out that people will spend more money to go to the Caribbean than they will to visit a relative in Detroit. So sorry if you're from that area, that was her quote, not mine. And when they get there, they want to be able to put their feet in the water and they want to be able to see their manicures. meaning they want to see healthy reefs, healthy water. And so within NOAA, we actually do have a coral reef observing system. And I say system because it requires us to do direct observations of biological, physical, and chemical conditions by divers and underwater researchers.
So these people, all they do is they swim in coral reefs all day long? Can I apply for
No,
that?
they like to. We've got about 100 divers in NOAA, and they do spend a fair bit of time either in the sanctuaries or at the coral reefs, going down and monitoring conditions. So it depends on where the location of those coral reefs are, how often they're able to get out there. Some of the reefs out in our sanctuary in Hawaii, or a monument in Hawaii, they're only able to get out there once a year if they're lucky. Yeah. So they have indirect observations through remote sensing, and then we are able to, in these reefs, to put in non-invasive pilings and moorings to be able to understand and produce regional and global near real-time maps to be able to understand the health of the coral reef. So when I got into the business of ocean observing, actually I started in the Navy. When I came back to NOAA and I got back into the business of ocean observing, I had no idea that the sanitation districts would actually be one of my customers. But they are. So this is an example in Southern California. There's 2 huge sanitation districts in Southern California, Orange County and Los Angeles. And this is an example about Orange County. So they basically treat effluent, and they have 2 pipes. One's a long pipe, and it goes out 4.5 miles and discharges treated water in 200 feet of water. Doesn't affect the recreational beaches of Newport and Huntington and Malibu, some of those beaches you may have heard about. But they have a shorter pipe, and that's only a mile out. And that actually discharges in 60 feet of water. And that, when the plume comes up, even though it's safe, has the ability to come back on shore, and the public doesn't like to use that. And the permitting was we can only use the short pipe in emergency repairs for the long pipe. So it's costing the sewer districts a lot of money just to be able to avoid using that shorter pipe. So that was in 2004. In about 2007, they had to do maintenance on the pipe. And so they worked with with NOAA and with the IUS Association Southern California, and we said, let's take a look at our gliders, let's take a look at our HF radars, let's take a look at our ocean models, and let's be able to predict when the flow is going to be offshore. So they did that prediction. They worked with the local sanitation district, the health, a lot of outreach with the public, and they were able to go from the long pipe to the short pipe, and that was successful. So now fast forward to 2012, the Orange County now has permit that they can use the shorter pipe to do routine maintenance, not just the emergency maintenance, and they're saving millions of dollars by being able to keep up with the maintenance in the sewer district. So I had no idea that I would be able to help the sanitation districts. Now moving into the Great Lakes, as my colleagues in the Great Lakes say, we drink our water. In fact, it provides drinking water to over 26 million people. And this summer, NOAA worked through its observing and again modeling that when Toledo was forced to issue a non-drink order for 400,000 people between the 2nd and 4th of August, because toxic algae had contaminated the water supply. So NOAA was working in that area as well. So just a couple more examples here. So how do we know what to observe and what the issues are? And the Arctic is a very good example of that. We are starting to see some significant changes in the Arctic. So we've gone out with our stakeholders to determine what are those key issues up there. And they've determined they've got coastal communities at risk. This is erosion. We are seeing an increase in maritime operations, whether it's because the Arctic is opening up from an ice-free perspective. We've got more oil and gas exploration, therefore we have just naturally more traffic. And then we've got changing ecosystems, and we could be opening up fisheries in the Arctic, and therefore we need a management regime. So then we understand, okay, these are our problems. What are the types of information we need to be able to provide? And from there, we can then, as you can see, we've got our list here, and we can determine what platforms we need to then observe with. And I can tell you that the observing infrastructure in the Arctic is not at the level of that which we have in the mid-Atlantic or the mid-latitudes or the lower 48. So I've talked to you about observing, but we can observe all we want. But if people don't take actions on the observations we make, then it really doesn't do us any good. So this is an effort that's been ongoing for a number of years. For the past decade, NOAA scientists have been working with Pohnpei to help local communities address the relationship with climate issues to health, sea level rise, fisheries, energies, and many other concerns. Using the observing here, which are both buoys and gliders, we're able to, in advance of an El Nino, predict the El Nino. And when they have the El Nino, they're going to have a drought. And so what they have seen that in the drought, they need to boil water to keep it safe. So they came up with an El Nino task force, and they came up with a boil water campaign. So they have billboard signs out, and they actually put this to music, and it became a really popular song on the radio, and people actually heeded that warning. And we've seen that the cholera rates have actually dropped because of what we're doing here. So as I close out, I've talked about partnerships. So how do we do this in the United States? We have a program called the U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System that is a national program about coordinating observing. NOAA and all of the other federal agencies that you see here have a mandate to observe. And they observe based on those mandates and missions. But we ask them to contribute into the IU so we can integrate it. We also have set up these regional associations. There's 11 of them that are made up of state, local, tribal government, academia, and industry. And they connect us to our stakeholders. But because since they're part of IUs, they're part of an integrated system. And we can coherently bring the observing to bear on the community problems. But it's not good enough to just do that within the United States. You certainly know that the oceans have no boundaries. And so we get together through a group called the Group on Earth Observations. The Group on Earth Observations is outside the UN structure. It is completely voluntary. I call it akin to Science Without Borders. It is the one group that is uniquely focused on bringing observations from the maritime, the land, and the atmosphere towards community issues. And Dr. Sullivan said this. So Dr. Sullivan is the administrator of NOAA, and she was at the recent plenary. And I'm going to read this because it's a quote from her. "We are the first generation of human beings ever in all of global history to take the pulse of the planet this way with the array of instrumentation. GEO aims to facilitate the sharing of data among countries and organizations so we all have global public goods that enable us to provide environmental intelligence. Sharing is good, but using is really important. We have to make sure that this extraordinary capability that we have to take the pulse of the planet does not remain just in abstract scientific journals somewhere, that it actually comes off the page and out of the instrumentation and connects to real people's lives, to real decisions, to real challenges we face across the globe at every scale, from individual family to an entire country. So I thank you, and I hope that I've had a chance to convince you that ocean observing is critical and that you can help us and be that conduit to be able to tell the story of ocean observing so we can make our communities and our people more resilient. So thank you.
So we do have time for a couple questions, and also we will have time at the end in case, as you see other presentations that can come. Are there any quick questions? Yes, sir.
So, just curious, how, so you shared a lot of really useful information. How accessible is the data that you all collect? Because I know one thing right now in journalism is like visuals and everything. So, I mean, as much data as we can get as possible, I think that always helps. So I just think of the initiative. So when the Asian Park thing is going on, we would always like look for data and databases to visualize that. How accessible is that?
So the first answer is that all of the observing information that is collected by federal taxpayer must be made available. And NOAA, through programs like mine and through many websites, does our best to make that information available to you. I think part of what we face is that we have so much information that it does get spread out through many websites. And so we are trying to bring them back into more community websites. IUSE would be one of those. And also to work, NOAA recently put out a request for information on how we might work with industry to get this data out, get this public good data out in a easier to use format. So we work on that every day. It is there, but it might not always be as easy as we would like for you to find it. So.
Is it in real-time data, or how quickly?
Most of the sensing that I showed you is available in real time. There are certainly some of the information that needs to be analyzed that then has some delay to that. The government is really working on all project data that we fund from a scientific perspective to be available no more than 1 year afterwards, so in some of the project. But most of the information that I showed you here is real time and is available in that as we're taking the information. Yes, ma'am.
What other nations or entities have monitoring on this type of scale, and sort of like how much visibility of the oceans when you combine all those efforts do you have?
So there is, so on your first question on how many other nations, so many of the nations have ocean observing programs in place. Certainly in the global ocean, we've teamed up with a number of other nations for Argo, and that allows us to have a global view. Same thing with the tide gauges. So that comes together through international programs. Australia, for one, has a similar system that they've put in place. Most of the European countries come together in a regional capacity. But having said all of that, because we need to go from the surface of the ocean to the depths, we actually, really don't have much of the ocean covered on a day-to-day basis. We don't really have a percentage, but it is vastly under sampled.
And I was just going to ask you what you thought were the weak spots in this observation system. Is that one of them?
I think the weak spot, in my opinion, is the ability really to sample through that water column. I mean, we're getting to understand. We have the satellites that are providing us that surface perspective. Argo does a good job. It comes up to the surface about every 10 days. I think what we really need to be able to do is use some of this newer technologies to be able to get that three-dimensional coverage in a way that we can understand it in a much better way, because there's so much I think we still don't know.
I see you're a captain and oceanographer in the Navy,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd be interested to hear how NOAA and the Navy kind of work together.
Sure. So we have very close working relationships with the Navy. So let me step back a minute. So I spent 25 years as a meteorology and oceanography officer in the U.S. Navy. And from an oceanographic perspective, the Navy is very concerned about bathymetry. So all of the waters, the U.S. waters charts, the Navy uses NOAA's charts, and then does surveying outside of U.S. waters. Very interested in understanding how sound moves through water. And so the three-dimensional profile, all the information that NOAA makes available and the world makes available, the Navy uses. I'll give you an example here recently. So on the animal tagging, the Navy models in the Central Pacific need to be improved. And so we were able to work with the Navy to get the historical animal track data, that elephant seal that you saw, or sorry, that was not an elephant seal. When we tag elephant seals, they happen to go in and around the Pacific where we don't have much data. And so we just worked with the Navy to be able to improve their models, and they're now funding tagging information. So it's very close. There's also a very close relationship in the modeling capacity for the United States, both atmospheric and ocean. There are formal agreements between not only Navy and NOAA, but Navy and Air Force. So it's a very close relationship.
You mentioned Hurricane Sandy in your presentation. Can you talk a bit about the process that goes into preparing for a major hurricane like that? And also, how as journalists can we access practical information that we can pass on to our viewers and readers that they can easily consume and utilize to prepare for the hurricane or for the aftermath?
So within NOAA, the National Hurricane Center is our lead for the to put the actual forecast out. That's the official forecast comes out for the National Hurricane Center. So the National Hurricane Center issues the forecast using the vast capabilities of the entire agency, and they are also responsible for the interaction with the media, if you will. They have daily about every
media briefings.
Media briefings. Thank you. And we do that centrally so that the official forecast is put out. And then so I think that's probably the best way that you have the ability to access is through the National Hurricane Center and the National Weather Service, who sets up those media alerts and media activities, that we're ensuring that we're getting the same information out. Because what you don't want to have is one group putting out a different set of information than others, because then we'll confuse the public.
And it is centralized, like on the National Hurricane Center does have a website where all of their forecasts and products of projected storm track intensities, our storm surge models, all of those products will be, and they're continually updated. I think as a hurricane approaches, like every 4 to 6 hours. And
are those graphics fair use?
Yeah, so they're getting better. We've learned a lot. We in fact have, and Sandy was a good example of, we tend to sometimes talk in convoluted terms like, mean lower level water and all of those datums, and you just care where the water's going to be. So we are actually working with our social scientists in the agency, and we have been rolling out more graphic intensive and easy to understand graphics here in the last year as a result of some of the confusion during Hurricane Sandy.
That media organizations can put on their site.
Yes.
Okay.
And the organization abilities with the co-ops, Center for Operational Oceanographic Products and Services, is actually also working with the Weather Channel to be able to get this information out. And Billy, I don't know if you're going to talk about that today. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I was hoping you can go into something you mentioned a little earlier. You said the Navy has limited tracking in the middle of the Pacific.
So the Navy the models in the oceanographic models. The Pacific is huge, so the oceanographic models in the Pacific suffer from having oceanographic data. And so one of the projects we just did was the elephant seals and the animal tracks, who do tend to go out in the middle of the Pacific where we don't have ships going out. We the collective, we don't have a lot of ships collecting oceanographic information out there. The Argo floats, even as populous as they are, the 3,000, it's kind of like having maybe 1 or 2 weather stations in the state of Virginia. So it's just a vast expanse. So what we're able to do is take that information, the historical information, and you can do reanalysis on the models, and you can improve the physics of the model so it gets better.